a few stories. We'll see how many I get to. I know a couple of these are on the longer side, so it might not be many stories, but they'll be, quality, the ones that I am reading you. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into the video. The first story that I have for you guys is called The Limping Woman. You hear the uneven footsteps first. Drag, click, drag, click. That's how you know she's behind you. The heel is broken off of her left shoe and she drags it across the ground with every step, a sharp contrast to the steady click of her still intact pump. Help me, she whispers. It's an urgent, anguished plea. Please, I'm hurt. Help me. Don't turn around. That's when she gets you. Don't run. She still gets you. But this time, she's going to make it hurt. At least that's the rumor, anyway. Every small town has at least one, a local urban legend that everyone knows and swears is true because their sister's best friend's cousin's neighbor's grandson knew a fella who actually encountered it. Ours was the Limping Woman, so named for her aforementioned distinct gait. It was said that she was a teacher at the elementary school some decades before. Young, beautiful, and the victim of a terror. Sorry guys, my phone died. As I was saying, young, beautiful, and the victim of a terrible murder. She had been walking home to the house she shared with her parents one night after school when she realized she was being followed. She sped up and so did her pursuer until both were running down this dark country lane with only open farmland on either side. Her heel broke and her ankle snapped and she fell and her pursuer became her murderer. It was a slow, torturous affair that left her beaten and covered in stab wounds, and when the killer was done, he just left her to bleed out beside the road. She wasn't found until the next morning, and by then, all anyone could do was search for the person responsible. While some believe that the man was caught and dealt with not long after, others think he or she is still at large, and the Limping Woman, as the victim came to be known, won't rest until her killer is caught. I was always skeptical at best of the story. I'd passed the spot where she was supposed to appear 100 times without incident, as did everyone else I knew. If a murderer's ghost lived there, I was pretty sure I'd have seen her. I said as much to my friend Steffi when she brought up that a friend of a friend had met the Limping Woman during lunch at school one day. It's true. She was out. Sorry guys, there's a loud, obnoxious car. Anyway, she was out on the old highway a couple nights ago and saw her. Steffi insisted stubbornly over her sandwiches. If she actually saw her, wouldn't she be dead? I asked. I thought you weren't supposed to turn around. Heard her, whatever, you know what I mean, Marina. Sure, I said with a roll of my eyes. It always frustrated Steffi that I didn't share her willingness to believe the unbelievable. So how'd she get away? She said the words, duh. Oh right, the woman's last words we all somehow know without her having caught the one person who would have heard them. We know them because the real killer was never caught. He told people who told other people, and we all just magically knew to use them to ward off being killed. I finished for her. Steffi frowned. She loved all things spooky and supernatural, and had spent a lot of time researching her local legends, especially the Limping Woman. It's not magic, it just reminds her of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. Okay, I said, hoping that that would be enough to put an end to the topic. It was an argument neither of us would win, and I didn't feel like getting into it again over whether or not a ghost was real. At 15, it was starting to feel silly. Steffi, however, wasn't going to let me off so easily. They say she remains because the spot she haunts. No, don't be dumb, I said. You don't believe anyway, so what's the big deal? I've walked past there a lot, okay? Nothing's ever happened. Have you gone after dark? Steffi had started to smile. No, but so what? That's when she's active. Going in the day doesn't count. That is dumb, I said again. We'll go tonight. Every argument I had was met with questions of whether I was too afraid, and Steffi mocking me for being a chicken. She kept it up for the rest of lunch, through our shared science class, and then passed me notes in the halls between classes after that. By the time the final bell rang, she had worn me down. But not because I believe she's there. I made sure she knew. I'm just going, so you shut up. The sun set just after 5 that evening. At 7, we met up on our bikes in front of my neighborhood. Her parents thought she was doing a project at mine. Mine thought I was at hers, and we'd had 2 hours to ride out to the farm where the limping woman was said to haunt and get back before they started trading phone calls. We pedaled hard and fast, leaving behind the glow from windows and street lamps until darkness swallowed up the world around us. With only moonlight to guide us, we wove our way across town and passed into the outskirts, where the insects were louder, the stars were brighter, and the safety that came from feeling like you were surrounded by other people fell away. It was hard not to feel entirely exposed out on that old road where flat fields rolled off into the distance on either side. There was the occasional barn or farmhouse set a ways off down long, dusty drives, but otherwise it really was just us and our bikes and the night. Up ahead, Steffi said from behind me, see the cross? That's the marker for her. We skid to a stop a few yards away from it and exchanged a glance almost lost in the shadows. Scared? She asked, breathless with excitement. No, I said. It was an honest enough answer. I was nervous, sure, but who wouldn't be when you're outside after dark? Remember, if you turn around, she gets you. If you try to run, she makes it worse. Just stand still when she's close by and say the words. Steffi spoke so seriously that I had to stifle a giggle. It was ridiculous. I kept trying to tell that's all the butterflies stirring in my stomach, but it didn't do much good. We climbed off our bikes and set them on their kickstand. Steffi groped about for my hand and twined her fingers with mine. She was shaking. Ready? Let's just get it over with, I replied. We walked up to where the cross was placed and paused. Steffi squeezed my hand and took in a slow, shuddering breath. Her fear was starting to have an effect on me, quickening my heartbeat, but I squared my shoulders and clenched my jaw and took a step forward. We crept along the roadside, careful to keep our eyes pointed straight ahead. Steffi kept reminding me in a trembling whisper that looking anywhere else could lead to trouble. A minute or 2 passed. It couldn't have been longer despite feeling like it, and nothing seemed to happen. My fear began to ebb, replaced by an admittedly relieved giddiness that I had been right, and almost turned to Steffi to say, I told you so. And then I realized how quiet it was. All the insects that had been singing loudly when we arrived had gone silent. There were no distant calls from night birds, no breeze passing over us, nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing. To my surprise, Steffi sighed. eyes on me, but couldn't bring myself to look at her. From somewhere over my shoulder, a woman started to sob softly. "Help me," she cried plaintively. "Rena," Steffi said again. She's coming," I managed to whisper. Instead of being scared, Steffi snorted. "Real funny. I get it, okay? The limping woman is just made up. I'm convinced now. You don't have to rub it in." Drag, click, drag, click. The unmistakable sound of someone inching toward us, slowly, painfully, crying out with each step. "Please," she begged. "I'm hurt, and he's still out there." "Steffi," I hissed, tears burning in my eyes. "She's coming." There must have been something in my voice, a tightness that only true terror could cause, that convinced my friend that I wasn't just pretending. She grabbed my forearm with her other hand and clutched it until her nails were digging into my skin. "She only goes after people who don't believe," Steffi said. "That must be why." "What do I do?" I begged, my mind white and blank. My entire body was screaming to run, to get away from that thing that was getting closer and closer. But Steffi's firm grasp and my own mounting dread held me in place. "Please," the limping woman sobbed. "Turn around, help me." "The words," Steffi said hurriedly. "You have to say the words when she's right behind you." "What words?" I wanted to scream, but I couldn't speak or think. I could only hear her. Drag, click, drag, click. The legend said you'd hear uneven footsteps and be forced to listen to her pleas, but no one ever mentioned the smell. The stench of rot and earth and blood oozed through the air, slowly surrounding me and wrapping itself around me like tentacles, smothering me. I gagged and pressed my free hand over my mouth and shook my head violently, trying to clear it, trying to make sense of things. Steffi was jerking on my arm and saying something to me over and over again, but I could barely hear her over the limping woman's cries. The smell was getting so strong, making my stomach pitch and heat until I thought I'd be sick. I leaned heavily on Steffi, and she pulled me in close so that her lips were beside my ear. Through the veil of panic and nausea, I heard her scream, "Say the words!" Drag, click, drag, click. The limping woman was so close behind us now that I could feel the chill radiating off of her. The words, I thought. I had to say the words. It just reminds her of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. I heard Steffi's voice from the previous day echo in my head. Her mother. The words remind her of her mother, the limping woman's last words. "But please," bile rose in the back of my throat. "My mother's waiting for me." The footsteps stopped and were replaced by a high-pitched, heart-wrenching keen. From somewhere off in the night, a dog started to howl. Insects began to sing again. The wind whistled across the field, sounds of normalcy, of life. The limping woman continued to screech while I found my legs again and with Steffi in tow, tore back to the bikes. I never once looked up from the ground. The only thing I saw as we darted by was a pair of feet in torn stockings and pumps, the heel of one of which was missing. We didn't stop riding until we made it back to my lawn, and when we got there, I raced to the bushes on the side of the house and vomited. Steffi claims she didn't hear or see anything that night, but she believes that I did. She believes that I encountered the limping woman. I tried to come up with some sort of rationalization for it, like power of suggestion or something. But when I think back to those footsteps and those sobs and that final scream, I know there's only one explanation, and now I too believe in the limping woman. Wow, okay, that was a pretty good one, I think. Obviously, I'm sure that one's probably not real, but it was entertaining nonetheless. Okay, the next story that I have for you guys is called Grandma's Light is Always On. In one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was almost never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then, she hurried, holding her breath until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tussle my hair, and promptly change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips depressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. Grandma had never so much as raised her voice before, and I was too shocked to cry. She cried enough for both of us, gathering me up in her arms and begging me for my forgiveness. With her face buried in my shoulder, she finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house back when they arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. Only when her burden threatened to drive her mad did she ask Grandpa for help. She had expected him to laugh her out of the house, but he had surprised her by nodding gravely. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. I stopped visiting my grandma after that. It started gradually at first, missing a day here and there, but by the time I received news of her death, I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. As her only living relative, I shouldn't have been surprised when I inherited her house. Yet as I sat in her lawyer's office listening to him read her will, I was speechless. I had a difficult time paying attention after that, absorbed as I was with the business of remembering. So much love had filled those walls, so many happy memories. As I thought of my tiny, sterile apartment in the city, I quickly made my decision. I was almost overwhelmed by emotion as I walked through the front door. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. House plants still cluttered the windowsills, decorative bird plates still hung on the walls, and the ghost light still burned in the living room. Seeing the old lamp sent a chill down my spine. I froze in my tracks, the smile fading from my lips, and couldn't help but think of the night Grandma had slapped me so many years ago. I had told my mother about the ghost light the next day, but she had dismissed it as a simple old-world superstition. It was the same way when she was growing up, she told me, and I shouldn't worry about it. Still, I couldn't shake the conviction that I had finally seen the true depths of my grandma's lunacy. I ran my fingers through the fringe on the lampshade as I thought, a bloom of sadness darkening my nostalgia. Sighing heavily, I turned the ghost light off with a decisive click. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment, and I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching continued intermittently, constantly jerking me from the edge of sleep, and I finally had enough. I threw the blankets off of me and stormed out into the hall. Moonlight flooded the front of the house, and I didn't bother turning on lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house, even after so many years, and I moved confidently through the dim light. I was furious at having been woken up from a dead sleep, and my anger ill-prepared me for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor where the walls met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. A gnarl of dread unfurled in the pit of my stomach. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, it took me some time to summon the courage to approach her. My hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask her where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I lived my life happily enough. But my grandson has been asking about the ghost light lately. Each time he asks, I smile softly. For some reason, I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. I think about how I pulled away from my grandma, how I thought her crazy, and I keep my mouth shut. I worry though. I know I won't be around forever, just as I know he will eventually turn off the ghost light. I worry that he might see me then, twisted and wrong, scratching in the corner. Wow, that was a pretty good one too, guys. What do you think? Let me know down below. Let's see, I might have time for one more story. Okay guys, the next and last story is called Mimicry or Mimicry. It's Mimicry. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. But okay. I was worried when I first inherited Claudette that she would be lonely and depressed. I knew parrots were supposed to be social creatures, but I was barely equipped to handle one, much less get her a companion. Aunt June, who had generously given the bird to me after discovering how loud and energetic she could be, assured me that Claudette was an independent sort and would be fine on her own. Claudette and I had a rocky start. I was timid around her large beak and sharp claws, and she was slow to trust yet another new person. She'd apparently had a number of homes in her 25 years, all of whom had given her up much the same as my Aunt June had. That was mostly why I kept her. I felt sorry for her and wanted her to finally have a home, even if it meant a steep learning curve. We had what felt like a very long period of adjustment, during which I learned that getting bitten, while painful, could have been much worse, and she started to at least recognize me as the hand that fed her. When I discovered she was the happiest in my small screened-in porch, I moved her cage there and gave her a free run of it, which also improved our relationship. It took a lot of time, patience, and treats, but eventually it got to the point that she would fly over to me whenever I went out and sit on my arm while she inhaled whatever I'd brought to her. If I had been worried about her getting lonely while I was away, those concerns were quickly banished when I realized she was making fast friends with the mockingbirds who nested in a tree behind my apartment. They trade calls and squawk at each other throughout the day, which sometimes got me in a little trouble with my more noise-sensitive neighbors, but that wasn't anything a few homemade cookies and apology cards couldn't smooth over. I'd never considered getting a parrot before, but Claudette proved to be a sweet, smart girl once you got past her initial orneriness, and I learned that she had a fairly extensive and sometimes colorful vocabulary and was an excellent little mimic. I also found out that over the course of a few months while I was at work, she'd apparently been teaching the mockingbirds a thing or two. I was sitting on the porch one evening, giving Claudette a little neck scratch before going to make dinner, when I heard a soft but very distinct voice coming from somewhere overhead. "Shit," it said. I jumped, having not seen or heard anyone approach, and looking around from my little corner of the apartment complex, she was quiet, and no one was outside. In my lap, Claudette started to bob her head, her feathers ruffling so slightly. "Shit," the voice said again. "Shit," Claudette answered. She and the voice went back and forth a few more times, enthusiastically shouting one of her favorite words, until I rushed her inside in embarrassment, to keep whoever was taunting her from going any further. It wasn't until I saw one of the mockingbird's friends swoop by the porch a few times, obviously in search of Claudette, that I realized the voice I had been hearing hadn't been someone encouraging her naughty behavior. It had been the mockingbirds mimicking her. Claudette had taught the wild birds to swear. It was going to take a lot more cookies to get back on my neighbor's good side when they had figured that one out. Instead of moving her inside, I decided to try and encourage her to use sweeter phrases that I hoped the mockingbirds would pick up on. "Hello," I said over and over again. "Hello," Claudette said. "Shit," the mockingbird said. Shit, indeed. I hadn't even known the mockingbirds could talk, much less how I'd get them to pick up new words, so I scoured the internet and asked around, hoping for some insight. They just repeat what they hear often. One bird enthusiast replied when I left a comment up something else soon. A mockingbird near me constantly called my dogs for ages until I picked up a new bird song. Good luck. Okay, I told myself. I could wait them out. In the meantime, I kept working with Claudette to clean up her own language and spent a bit of time every night repeating words to her and rewarding her when she got them right. It took a few more weeks and months, but the swearing was definitely on a decline, and I hadn't heard the mockingbirds repeating her anymore, so I was counting it a victory. One morning, when I went out to feed her before I left for work, she bobbed and paced along her rung with her usual enthusiasm, but I noticed she was making these odd raspy noises like she couldn't quite catch her breath. I took her up on my arm and gave her a quick once-over while stroking her back. You okay? I asked. Hello, she said, and the odd breathing stopped. I waited for a little while, almost enough time to make me leave, but she seemed fine, and I rushed out to get to work. The next morning, however, the low, rasping noises were back. She again came over to me and fluffed and bobbed, all the while making the ragged breathing sounds. Outside, the mockingbirds were responding with unusual clicking noises. I didn't pay much attention to them, too concerned for my poor Parrot. Unable to leave her again when she was in such an obvious state of distress, I called my boss to let her know I had a family emergency and hurried Claudette to the nearby vet. I told them in a quavering voice that I was sure she had some kind of serious illness and explained that she was having trouble breathing, and they ushered me into a room to wait with the doctor. When he came in, I again told him about the sounds and begged him to listen to Claudette. She was sitting in her travel cage, preening quietly, completely undisturbed by the fact that her life was hanging in the balance. I swear she sounded horrible yesterday and today, I insisted. Sometimes these things come and go, Dr. Graham said gently. Can you do me a favor? Imitate the sound she was making. I quickly did, as he asked, hoping I'd be accurate enough for him to understand the severity of the situation, and immediately Claudette started to mimic me. Dr. Graham hid a smile behind his hand before catching himself and becoming serious again. She's fine, Stacy. It seems she may have overheard you during some nighttime activities and is just repeating those sounds. What? I think she heard you with your partner, during intimate moments. Claudette emphasized his statement with an unmistakable little moan. With my face burning a bright red, I packed up my bird, mumbled an apology, and thanked him, and practically ran out of the office. You've been listening to the neighbors, I accused, now whistling Claudette on the way home. Or has someone been playing their TV too loud? How did you learn to make those noises? It certainly hadn't been from me. That much I knew. Whatever it was, it must have been going on for a while if she was starting to mimic it. I couldn't just go around asking my neighbors if they were getting down and dirty with the windows open. So for now, I just have to try and keep a closer eye on what she was getting exposed to. When I released her back onto the porch, she squawked. A chorus of hellos to the mockingbirds who sank back and then settled on top of her cage for a nap in the sun. I sat on the porch with her for a good portion of the day, but didn't hear anything particularly telling, and eventually gave up when it became uncomfortably warm outside. I still poked my head out on occasion, but the most unusual thing I heard was the mockingbirds making their newly picked up clicking sound. While it was familiar, I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it before and dismissed it. Excuse me. Claudette's heavy breathing sounds started to become a more frequent part of her morning, along with the occasional moan, and every so often she'd mumble to herself, pretty, pretty, pretty. At least that was an improvement on shit. She and the mockingbirds continued their back and forth, and I got used to their clicking noises the same way I had their swearing. It was especially bad in the morning when Claudette was doing what I came to call her breathing exercises. Ragged breathing. Click, click, moan. Click, click, rinse and repeat. I just had to wait them out and they'd eventually move on to some new sound to try and drive me crazy with. But the more I heard it, struck me as exhibitionist types. Raina giggled. Aren't they the old people? Yeah, and they need some loving too. While we laughed, I heard a series of soft clicks through the open door. Oh, I said. The mockingbirds are doing the thing I told you about. Maybe you can hear them and tell me what that damn noise is. I sprang up from my couch and crossed the living room to yank back the sheer curtaining across the slide. The clicking stopped immediately. Beside me, Claudette paced back and forth across her cage top, mumbling all the while. Pretty, pretty, pretty. A bush on the other side of the screen shook just slightly. The light from inside my apartment reflected off the porch screen, making it difficult to see outside, and I froze. I can't hear them, Raina said in my ear. Stacy. The bushes rustled again. Claudette started making the shuddering, raspy breathing sounds from the trees overhead. The mockingbirds responded with their clicks. I now recognized the sound with a sudden, chilling clarity. Raina, I said, calmly as I could, I think someone's in my bushes. As soon as the words left my mouth, a dark figure sprang upright and was making a mad dash around the side of the apartment building. It happened so quickly that I couldn't make out much. No features, nothing significant, just dark clothes and maybe a hat. And then he was gone. Raina was asking me in an ear panic if she could call the police when I was too stunned to answer. It had taken months for me to teach Claudette words, months for her to pick up new sounds, months for her to learn to mimic accurately. No doubt it would have taken the same amount of time listening to someone breathing heavily and moaning to repeat the sounds accurately. My stomach dropped fast and far, and I thought I might vomit. She hadn't learned those sounds from noisy neighbors or a television show. She'd learned it from the man who had been hiding outside my apartment, panting like a dog while he watched me. I stumbled back against the slider and scrambled to get inside again. Over my shoulder, one of the mockingbirds called out into the night from a treetop. Click, click. The perfect imitation of a camera shutter. Guys, no, that was so creepy. I didn't get it, like, for a while. Like, I was trying to think of what, like, those sounds would be as I was reading the story to you, and, like, it wasn't